Not online yet? No. Soon. There we go. Okay, the channel is live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I'm Christiana Ellis,
I'm Mike Mateen.
and we watched 100 movies. We started our show watching through the American Film Institute's top 100 movies list, but then we watched those movies, and we felt like there were more movies to talk about, so here we are. Do you want
There we
to
are.
So, since it was your topic suggestion last time, do you want to introduce what we're talking about today?
Um, yeah, sure. Uh, I think I stated this last time. So, I just finished reading a book, become fairly popular over the last, I think, maybe 2 or 3 years. It's called Can't Hurt Me. It's by a former Navy SEAL who, you know, was originally a overweight, 300-pound exterminator for a job, and decided to get his life together and join the Navy. And it's all about kind of his mental journey from that, kind of desperate life that he was living paycheck to paycheck and not unhealthy, to kind of how he conquered his mind and became ultimately a Navy SEAL on the what was SEAL Team 6, the anti-terrorism unit. It's mostly, like I said, about, and he's also an ultra marathoner, and does a ton of endurance races. So the book's primarily about the mental part of it. It's not really about being a Navy SEAL, but it's like there's some other parts with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it just got me kind of thinking about, interesting combat movies that have to do with Navy SEALs, and about the same time, um, Zero Dark 30 came on, which obviously the end of that features, one of the most famous Navy SEAL missions, killing
Right.
Osama bin Laden. And it just made me, it was really fun to kind of watch that when I was kind of in that mindset. Not that it's a fun movie, but, it, that's a very
Mm-hmm.
entertaining sequence. That last 45 minutes is very well done.
Sure.
And it just made me think of other combat movies that are really well done and really entertaining. Um, and I started thinking about all the different styles of how combat movies are done, from um, thrilling to more personality or mental based,
Mm-hmm.
character analysis of what happens to people in combat, the jingoistic, sort of recruitment type ones that, kind of pro military, which is why, at first Starship Troopers, I didn't disagree with your choice, but it kind of surprised me. That was your choice to watch, by the way. Make
Yeah.
sure everybody knows. Yeah, it's a great movie to watch in this capacity, because it does those things in such a way. Almost, it's not like Deep Blue Sea,
Well,
kind of like
it is
that.
actively
Yeah,
satirizing those
right,
things, but
exactly.
it did it in a way where it kind. I mean, we'll talk more about this, but it did it in such a way that a lot of people didn't realize it was supposed to be satire and just took it
Right.
straight up and read it at face value. A lot of people did.
Well, and I
Um,
think that's a testament to how many movies there are that are like that.
exactly. Yes.
And so I chose The Hurt Locker, and
Mm-hmm.
part of the reason I did that, and that's why I introduced was sort of the multiple concepts of combat
Mm-hmm.
films, is that I think it kind of does a little bit of a lot of those types of movies in a way that I think didn't saturate what they were trying to tell, at least for me, and we'll get into it.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like it really did kind of tip in, like, there's some thrilling parts. There's obviously some character analysis of what this did to him. There is a little bit of, like, bravado in the character that does have a little bit of the nod to the pro military, like cowboyish, American.
Mm-hmm.
But I just feel like it just, the soup that they built with all of it was a really great recipe. And I really enjoyed that movie.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that was my choice. And then we decided, um, just because we both really like it, that The Great Escape technically counts
Mm-hmm.
as a combat film, even though there's not a ton of combat in it.
Yeah.
But we
Well,
felt like we wanted to watch something from that era as well. So
it
yeah.
felt like we were kind of triangulating three very different sort of presentations of war in film. Um, and so it just kind of felt like it might be interesting to explore the space of the triangle created by those three movies.
Yeah, and I agree. And I think so that was a great choice. So that was our third movie.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I obviously, we won't bring a ton of it into it, but I obviously had just watched Zero Dark 30, which, while technically not a combat movie, does have a significant combat scene.
Well, it's
Uh,
also Catherine Bigelow, right? Who's the
it's
same
also
director
Catherine
as
Bigelow, so I think
Hurt
it
Locker.
relates, yeah, to the Hurt Locker in that sense.
Hmm.
Um, and then I also watched Black Hawk Down just because that's an entertaining movie, and it was fun. It's like almost like extra credit. I felt like watching another movie, but that one is interesting because I didn't really think about it at the time, and while it is ostensibly fairly bloody and sort of shows the negative side of conflict, it does tell it in that kind of Ridley Scott like pro military troop, like you want to get behind the guys because of what they're facing, as opposed to like you hate war.
Right.
It kind of
Well,
hits a very spectacular note.
uh,
So it was a interesting one to watch as well.
so I was trying to do a real quick Google to try to remind myself for sure um, who it was that said this, but based on my quick Google, it seems to have been French filmmaker Francois Truffaut, who said it is actually impossible to make an anti-war film because violence on screen is inherently exciting and that results in glorifying it no matter what you try to do with the story. Which, I mean, we could argue about whether or not he's right, but it's an interesting point.
It is an interesting point, and yeah, I definitely just off the top of my head can think of movies that would argue that. I mean, Platoon. I
There
don't
have
think.
certainly been lots of people who tried.
Yeah, Platoon doesn't glorify anything for me. I mean, it is
Hmm.
kind of a dark movie. Um, Probably another one. It's not as great of a movie, but there was that. I'm always reminded of that movie Casualties of War, came out in the 80s or 90s.
Hmm.
Michael J. Fox, but they're in Vietnam, same thing, and his
Hmm.
platoon ends up raping a prisoner and then tries to cover it up and then tries to kill him for trying to tell on them. Like that one doesn't glamorize anything for me, you
Hmm.
know.
Well, no, I mean, I wasn't necessarily trying to take the position that I fully agree with Truffaut there, but I think it just the reason I looked it up was because it ties in a little bit to what you were saying with Black Hawk Down, which is to say it's one thing to show, oh, war is dangerous and scary, but like to a certain mindset, that's kind of what's cool about it.
Right, it's thrilling, like you said. Yeah,
Yeah. The idea of banding together with your squad mates and you're a team against the enemy, and isn't that cool? And the fact that it's dangerous and scary is just part of that whole thing.
right. And the most compelling character, if you remember that movie, is probably Eric.
I
Is it
haven't
Eric
seen it in a
Bana?
while.
Okay. Well, I think it's Eric Bana plays a Delta Force guy who's kind of a quiet badass that
Hmm.
sort of rescues everybody with his badassness, and like that just like that's part of it. Like it's like,
Hmm.
oh, this guy is so cool because it's so dangerous and yet he's unfazed and he's so trained and all that.
Hmm.
Like it's very much leans into that. So anyway, that's kind of
Yeah,
the groundwork for what we did, but we
sure.
will not be discussing Black Hawk Down. We will just stick to the three that we both watched.
Well, yeah, like we can tangentially mention other things, but let's definitely keep our focus primarily on these three main ones, just because that's plenty to talk about. So, do we want to go through them in chronological order, or frankly, we could do them in the order we just mentioned them because that's I mean, I think the Hurt Locker was the first suggestion when you were bringing up the topic, but chronological order also potentially makes sense. What do you think?
I'm fine with chronological.
Okay. Well, so that would certainly start us off with The Great Escape, which came out in 1963, set, of course, during World War II, uh, focused around the exploits of prisoners of war, specifically Air Force officers in a special German prisoner of war camp that's just for Air Force officers, British Air Force officers primarily, but there was a couple of other nationalities in there. And then, of course, part of what's established in that is that it was expected as part of the duty of a British officer is that if you are captured by the enemy, it is your duty to try to escape And if you are not able to escape, then at the very least, it is your duty to make the enemy expend as many resources as possible in preventing you from escaping.
Yes.
Which is a little bit interesting. It just reminds me a little bit about how, in that historical time frame, like before and up through kind of the Korean War, if an American was a prisoner, there was an expectation that you were supposed to like not say anything. Name, rank, and serial number. You don't give up any information because that could hurt your buddies. But then there was increasingly an expectation of like, oh gosh, then they just torture you, and that's really bad. So maybe we need to not tell our soldiers that they're killing their buddies if they're succumbing to torture. But that sort of change of paradigm made me. I was kind of reflecting on that as this movie was presenting this idea that British officers are expected to try to escape. The implication being that if they don't, that's a shameful thing.
Yeah, and I think it was also a different time of war too,
Mm-hmm.
where in a true old-fashioned war, there were a lot of protections.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there still technically are, but
Right.
for what you can and can't do to prisoners.
Right.
But
Well,
the modern warfare landscape has sort of eradicated that.
that's absolutely true. I mean, this is, of our three movies, it is the only example of a government fighting another government with pre established rules of engagement and conventions. Because certainly, um, there were, you know, uh, it feels like a crazy understatement to point out that the Nazis did a lot of awful stuff during World War II. But the point being specifically that this particular camp, the prisoners have access to a lot of stuff that we might not normally think of as things that the Nazis would have allowed their prisoners of war to have. But it was specifically, that's why I was making the point of like, it's specifically like British Air Force officers, and they were not the prisoners of the SS, they were prisoners of the Luftwaffe, which was, a distinction because it's actually a plot point of like the SS coming in and saying, hey, if you can't get the job done, we're going to take it over and do it our way. You know,
Right.
so it was almost a point of pride, even of the German officer, to say that we don't do things the way the SS does.
Yes, and there's the and in addition to that plot is the commander's, his all he's trying to do, and he says this on multiple times. He says it to them, but he's also talking about himself as much when he talks about that they're just going to ride the war out.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, well, just you just stay here, don't try to
Yeah.
escape, we'll just ride the war out together. And then he meant that as what he wanted as much as
Right.
what.
Like you almost want to imagine a version of that scene where he's just going, "Come on, you guys, stop making this so hard. We're just going to get a cushy gig here and just hang out, and everyone else is going to kill each other. We can just like be buds, and then when it's done, we shake hands and go our separate ways." But no, you have to keep making it complicated. Well, and for that matter, I think it's an interesting and valid question. This elaborate escape attempt that's depicted in the movie, exciting, no doubt, but the end result of it was that two people actually got away, a whole lot of people got executed, and the prisoner of war camps got worse afterwards. So there raises, I think, a potentially valid question of like, what was was that in the end a good thing that happened? Not that it's good for them to stay prisoners of war, but it's just kind of an interesting question, I think, of
Yeah, and I think
looking at
that
the outcome.
yeah, and I think that's part of what makes this movie interesting is
Mm-hmm.
that for a lot of it is very much that thrilling, like it's fun to watch them try to escape and
Mm-hmm.
their creative plans, and there's a whole comedic element to it as much as
Yeah.
anything else. And then it comes at the end in this one of the most famous scenes is a Steve McQueen, bike chase at the end.
Yeah.
It's got these cool stunts and it's got all this stuff. But ultimately, yeah, it was. I think there's even the line at the end of like he's saying, what they're talking about whether the cost was worth it, and it says, well, it depends on your point of view. And it's and I think the idea being like that's why they establish so much throughout the movie that part of the duty is to try to escape and cause chaos, which
Hmm.
they certainly did do that. It just resulted in a lot of people dying and not a lot of
Hmm.
people getting away. And so it's like, if the end result was just to have this cool escape and everybody gets out, then it was an absolute failure.
Hmm.
So it's like it's very complicated at the end, and it leaves you with a complicated feeling, which I think is okay. Like at first it's a little off-putting, but I think on purpose because
Hmm.
you're sort of riding along, and then it starts to tick up in the drama a little bit. And I would say in my opinion, jumping a little bit ahead, but I think it's kind of part of this theme. The the part where it really takes the turn for me is when Danny has the cave in and sort of loses his, and his
Right.
whatever he was using to block out his childhood claustrophobia. It crumbles,
Hmm.
and it's like, oh wait, this is kind of like it's got a little darker. Like even though yeah, there was I forget the Scottish guy, the young Scottish guy.
Yeah. I'm looking at the. I'm
So
looking.
anyway,
There's
there's a
this is a
young
big
Scottish,
cast here.
yeah, young Scottish guy that's
Yeah, the one who keeps going into solitary with Steve McQueen.
right. He and Steve McQueen's sort of it's kind of their job, but also what they like doing is to just kind of keep the active escape attempts going so
Hmm.
that the other guys can build the tunnel without setting off any kind of alarm that why aren't people trying to escape? These are all guys who try to escape. But ultimately, it like wears on him mentally, and that's sort of the start to the turn.
Hmm.
But that's still an isolation of still like it's cool that we're building this tunnel, and oh, there's drama with which tunnel it discovered. Like that's all still kind of thrilling, and he just kind
Hmm.
of his death sort of fits into like okay, well there is still a real cost here.
Right.
But when Danny, even though Danny doesn't die in that scene, like when all of a sudden it's like wait, there's this is starting to go really poorly, and now they're starting to
Hmm.
press when all the things aren't clicking together like this, and it starts to take a little bit of a darker turn, um, and loses a little bit of the sort of rah rah like this is fun
Yeah.
like and it's all and just the way the scenes flow. There's the with the ultimate kind of rah rah scene is the Americans celebrating the Fourth of July and like how much fun like that's hilarious, right? But then of course that scene ends with them discovering the tunnel
Hmm.
because they're all out celebrating and nobody's doing all the techniques to guard the tunnel.
Well, I think that's largely true, but it's also clear that I like the way that the tunnel actually gets discovered probably would have been difficult to avoid, right?
It
Unless
wouldn't have
unless they
likely
had the
wouldn't have happened if they were doing sort of their machinations to kind of
well, that's true, I
because
suppose.
Warner's left alone in the room and
Yeah,
that's how
yeah,
he spills the tea. Yeah.
that's true. That's true. Yeah. And like to a large extent, I think that is just a good example of like dramatic storytelling, right? Because one of the things that I think is interesting watching this movie today is then looking up the real history and finding out how, even though like a lot of the characters are kind of amalgamated, and there was less actual participation from Americans um, in the real story, partly just because they're making a movie that for an American audience to a large extent.
Yeah, you gotta have Steve McQueen do something, so you
Yeah.
gotta have.
So, but a lot of even the stuff that seems a bit more unlikely watching the movie was actually what really happened. And but I kind of lost where I was going with that. I think. Yeah. Um,
You're
oh,
saying
but I
about
guess
you're
just the
tying into watching it today.
well,
There was something on that train of
where it's
thought.
actually no. What I was trying to get back to is that although a lot of the basic story of the movie is based on the real actual events, the pacing of how events are spaced out and presented in the movie, that's good dramatic storytelling because those events that you're talking about, that's what happens in Act 2 when things go bad, right? Before they rally and move on to. Although this movie, just in terms, if you want to kind of call it Act One, Act Two, Act Three, it kind of has a 40-minute epilogue, which is, they get to the escape, and then there's the whole rest of the movie that's about most of them getting caught again, which goes on every time I watch this movie. I forget how long a part of that movie, part of this movie that is, because it kind of keeps going for a while.
Yes, it's I. So the only opportunity I had to watch this movie was it wasn't late at night, but I couldn't start it until sort of mid evening.
Mm-hmm.
I purposely did not re-look at how long the movie was going to last because it was on a weekend at least. I mean, I knew I could stay up, but I just didn't want to know what I was committing to.
Mm-hmm.
And then yeah, I get to that, and it's like I'm ready to go to bed, and it there's
It
just like you
feels
said,
like,
there's
oh
another
yeah, this
40
movie's
minutes.
gotta be almost over here. Oh wait,
Yeah,
no, it's really not.
and then like you said, I knew all those things happened, but
Mm-hmm.
it takes a long time.
Yeah, but yeah, this movie is very like I I want to say that it's very economical and well paced and structured for such a large cast, giving all of them their own little bits and pieces of stuff to do and having it be interesting. And it's also true that even in that long sequence where it's so much of the movie where everyone's getting kind of recaptured. Part of that's really just because it seems like they didn't want to give any of the characters the short end of the stick, right? They wanted all of the characters who we'd really come to know to kind of get to do their part after the escape, even though that kind of just takes a long time to do that for everybody. But some of them just get killed in the actual, attempt to escape. Some of them, a whole bunch of them get rounded back up, and then the SS basically says, you know what? Instead of just taking them back to that camp, I think we're just gonna pull over to the side of the road here. And even though that was certainly not in accordance with the Geneva Conventions, um, but yeah, that's kind of what happened because they that's part of what happens when you have soldiers who are told that their duty is to make themselves expensive to the enemy, is that sometimes the enemy will say, you know what, that's too expensive.
Yes.
um, but yeah, so I feel like this, as I think in hindsight, now talking about it afterwards rather than before when we were speculating, I think there might have been other movies that might have been a better choice for this point of the triangle, so to speak. I mean, because this one is very sort of war adjacent,
Yep.
right? It's not really about the war. It's almost exactly specifically about people who are sort of on the sidelines of the war.
Yeah, and
They
so
were in the war.
I thought the same thing, and it reinforced that I thought this was a good movie to choose
Okay,
because
well that's yeah,
that is a genre or category of war
that's
combat
true.
movies
Yeah.
is like you said adjacent, you
Mhm.
know,
Yeah.
and the other human elements, consequences, and obviously there's many ways you can go with this, but I thought it was nice to kind of watch a movie that didn't actually have a lot of
Mhm.
actual combat.
Yeah.
It was just like you said. It was they started when they'd all already been shot down and tried to escape other places multiple
Mhm.
times.
Right. Um yeah, so I maybe you have a point there. I guess what I was just thinking is that if we wanted to say talk about other historical World War II films, and I'm not talking about Saving Private Ryan, I'm talking about 1950s World War II movies,
Mm-hmm.
or even into the 60s, right? Where just it was depicted very much more nope, you know, the U.S. are the good guys and they're the heroes and everything, we were fighting the bad guys and we were great and then we won and it was awesome. There were a lot of movies that kind of feel like that, I don't want to be glib about it because even a lot of those movies do sort of like the downside in them is that some people get killed, but it's very much like the heroic sacrifice, the price that was paid in order to achieve victory, that sort of thing. And I'm not trying to like relitigate World War II here. I'm just saying that
But that
certainly.
theme is even continued. I mean, Michael Bay made a Pearl Harbor movie. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that's not exactly what you're talking about, but it's
Yeah.
it's it's sort of the modern interpretation of that.
Mm.
I mean, it's like here are all these heroes, and they're so good, and they have these great romance
Mm-hmm.
stories and all this stuff, and it's
Yeah.
like, well, I mean, and to your point, like we were talking about earlier, I mean, just even talking about Pearl Harbor, like that bombing, which was a horrid day in U.S. history, is kind of an exciting Michael Bay action sequence. It's
Yeah.
like,
Well, like this is something we'll definitely get into when we talk about Starship Troopers, but just the idea of framing of certain events can really have a dramatic impact on the perception of them. But in the context of what we were talking about before, like the idea of a pro-war film or an anti-war film, I mean, I think a lot of those World War II movies are essentially pro-war films in the sense of saying we did the right thing, and it was hard, but we did it because we're awesome.
right.
And that's kind of just the vibe of a lot of those movies. And I think what we don't have really in our trio is kind of a representation of that, except in that Starship Troopers is kind of satirizing that.
And I think, and again, we'll talk about this more in the Hurt Locker. I think, like I said, I think it has a little bit of that in its recipe. Like there's a little bit of a thread of, these were bad people over there, and this was we should be there protecting people.
Yeah.
Even though it's not overt, and I think that's what makes it interesting.
Well, so are we ready to go ahead and move on? I mean, how much more do we have to say about The Great Escape? It feels like we didn't talk about it that much, but I don't know that I feel like I have a whole lot more to say about it, honestly.
I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah.
It's a thrilling escape movie
Yeah.
that's clouded by the realities of war, and it's very interesting. It's got a
Oh,
great soundtrack.
yeah. What? Oh, yeah. That does just remind me. There were a couple of minor things that I wanted to discuss about it. One was you say soundtrack. It has that iconic, dun 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 dun, and that became just kind of an iconic theme that would almost get riffed on in other movies for decades to
Yeah,
sort of like evoke this movie. Um, like it plays in The Simpsons when Maggie's trying to escape the evil daycare. I mean, stuff like that, right?
yeah,
Um, uh, but it also like in that sort of it's both its use and just musically it has a lot of similarity and overlap with the song that gets whistled in Bridge on the River Kwai. I think I
yeah.
think the two movies use the themes in kind of a very similar way. I think.
Yeah, and the last note I had is very similar to your compliment on this dramatic pacing.
Mm-hmm.
Was I think I don't remember the exact quote. You say it a number of times, but something about like great movies having a,
Well,
a collection of great scenes or something like that. Yeah,
it's a Roger Ebert quote, and it's I'm paraphrasing here because I don't remember the exact wording, but it's something to the effect of, "Great movies have three great scenes and no bad scenes."
okay. So I guess that's not what I was thinking the quote was. I was thinking that I thought it was more along the lines of like good movies have good scenes and at least one great scene, and great movies have a collection of multiple great scenes or something. That's kind of how I interpreted it in my
Okay,
head. I
well,
know it's not about the quote, but the point is this movie it is a lot of great scenes. It's
yeah,
almost like this could have been if it was made in the current era, like this could have been a mini series. Because it has cliffhangers and it has sort of nice stopping point, but you could watch a 30-minute chunk of this movie, as long as you had the pretext and the context or whatever, you could just watch one scene in this and it would be entertaining and self-sustaining. Now they build on each other obviously, but it is very well, it kind of episodically like ticks through in a
hmm
way that kind of contains these really cool scenes within themselves, as well as building the grander point.
yeah. I that just makes me think this isn't one of the other things that I was going to say about it, but I will say that this goes a little bit along the lines of what I was saying earlier with looking up the real history of it, and also just the idea of like all the rules they had to follow for this particular camp. I mean, there's a half dozen scenes in this movie where I sort of feel like they're really only able to do that because they're their captors are really giving them a lot of things that are could reasonably call luxury goods. You know, they have really nice barracks and bunks and iron stoves and silverware and all of these sorts of things that they have that they're able to, they have all these steel forks that they can eat with and then, hammer into making a pickaxe with. And it's like, it sure was nice of the Germans to give you all those forks, huh? They didn't have to. um, which is, I'm not trying to apologize for the Germans. It's more just a question of like some of the things that they're doing are ingenious under the circumstances, but also feel like it could only have happened because the circumstances allowed them. I don't know.
Yes, if you're being tied up in a shack blindfolded, you're not creatively, coming up with cool escape plans and
Right.
fake papers and all that
Yeah.
stuff that they were able to do. Yeah, very. But again, I think it's very different wartime.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, and I mean that's part of what I think is a little bit interesting to talk about. It's again, it's like it's one thing to have us cheer for Steve McQueen being so cool when he gets sent off to the cooler solitary confinement again, but gosh, it sure is nice of the guards to let him have his baseball glove in there with him. It seems like it would have been really easy, given that the whole point is punishment, to just say no, you can't take that in there with you.
Yeah, you. This is the fourth time you've tried to escape. We should probably kill you and stop you from doing this, but you continue
Gosh,
to
it
take the
seems like it
baseball.
doesn't bother you very much when we give you a way to entertain yourself. Well, and also, it's just like when he's writing out those times a little bit, relatively easier compared to, his Scottish buddy who keeps getting sent into the cooler with him. But like his friend doesn't have his baseball to throw at the wall.
No, and I was thinking about that too. His friend is listening to the thump
Yeah.
of his baseball, which is
Yeah, he
probably
gets to just
just
sit
a
next door and
waterboard.
hear ka-tunk, 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 all day for weeks.
Well, no, not waterboarding. It's not. That's actually trying to make you feel like you're drowning. But
Oh well, yeah,
the whatever the
the
sort of
yeah, the
torture,
like the
the
drip
drip
torture.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's what I was meaning. Yeah, that's
hmm yeah. So it does. There are some of those little elements of dramatic license that I kind of like. If you were to try to say, well, wait a minute, let's look at that a little bit. You know, Steve McQueen is getting lots of help being as cool as he is. You know.
yes.
But the last thing that I actually wanted to just kind of bring up about this one is that it is directed by John Sturges, who is also the director of Magnificent Seven. So kind of along the veins of what we were saying, what we did last time with kind of the idea of like also rans or whatever. What do you think this movie versus Magnificent Seven? Is the right one on the list, you think?
I think the right one's on the list. I really enjoy this movie. I enjoyed rewatching it. Um, I think it. I, it's hard because it's like I don't I think it is a great movie. I don't know that it is a top 100 must be in the list if you had to choose between this and the Magnificent Seven.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's one that I would always recommend to somebody to watch.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like I said, I think it's a collection of great scenes, great actors. It's a cool era of movie when you take out the combat theme of it, but just the idea of these sort of epic, large casts, and how you kind of, like you said, you give all the characters their due without shortchanging anybody. Like,
Mm-hmm.
while it does kind of take a long time at the end, like it's not boring ever. Like I'm never bored in that last 40 minutes. It's just
Well,
there's a lot of it.
I forget between viewings every time who it is that gets away and who doesn't. I always forget. The only guy I always do remember is what's his face with the scar on his eye, just because he's the one that kind of gets to look sad at the camera right before they all get shot.
Well, he was like the ringleader.
Yeah.
That's Richard Attenborough, by the way.
Yeah. Well, so yes, I did kind of know that, but like I was trying to remember the character name. But
Oh,
yeah, I mean
sorry.
he's great. Like I love that character in that role, but
They
that's
call it Big X in the movie because
yeah,
he's like the ringleader. Yeah.
yeah.
But anyway,
And yeah, so I think he's great, and but it's just like I think that moment is always ingrained enough in my head that I remember that one. But like for example, Steve McQueen's motorcycle chase is kind of so iconic that it's easy to forget that he does actually crash and get caught at the end of it.
yep.
He crashes into a barbed wire fence and he's all tangled up and he's like, "Whoop! What are you gonna do?"
Well, yeah, because the iconic part is the jump
Yeah,
of what you forget until you rewatch that it's a two-part fence, and he's able to only jump the first half, which is the shorter half, and then when
yeah,
he attempts the larger jump, which would have been even more epic, like where I don't even know if he can attempt it, he kind of skids into it,
yeah.
But yeah,
It was interesting, and I think probably the right choice that if they're going to invent a character for Steve McQueen to play, that they don't take away from the real life people who got away to invent an American character who also gets away.
hmm
I think that's the right choice, narratively speaking. But of course, so it's only our two tunnel buddies that do actually get away. Charles Bronson and his friend. I don't remember the other actor's name off the top of my head. I don't
is
have
it
the
James
cast list up.
Coburn that's with him?
Hmm.
Was it James Coburn that's with him?
Maybe. Hang on. I've got. Let's see if I can get the cast. So let's see. James Coburn was Sedgwick.
That was not who was with him, right?
Yeah. No. Charles Bronson
I don't know
was
why I can't think
Danny. I like Charles Bronson in this one more than in Magnificent Seven, but I do agree. I think on the early, what I was saying earlier. I think Magnificent Seven is the right movie, but I think Charles Bronson is better in this one. Yeah, I don't remember. Is it Ives, the mole, that was with him,
Yeah, I think it was Ives.
or is Ives the Scottish guy that was with Steve McQueen?
I'm not remembering.
Yeah, I don't. There's too many characters. Um, well, let's see. John Layton is Willie the Tunnel King, who and Danny is also Tunnel King. So maybe it's those two guys together.
James Coburn does get away, though. That's why I was thinking of him. He
Well,
steals the bicycle,
um, but I thought it
and
was
the Spanish help him.
right. You're right. It was three. I was for some reason in my head thinking it was still only two. But in any
Willie,
case,
Danny and Willie are the ones that take the rowboat.
right. Yes. Yeah. So in any case, um, I forgot what I was saying about it. I like that they get away, I guess was what I was saying. Oh, just the idea that if in real life the actual story is that there were three people who got away, you don't really want to diminish that because it's real history. There's people with, families still alive today that would have opinions about that. Certainly there would have been in 1963.
Yep. And the actor's name was John Layton. He
Mm-hmm.
was in like 8 movies. I don't know any of the other ones.
Yeah.
He was a singer as well. But anyway, um, that's not here nor there. But anyway, I
I
just think it because he also got away. But
It's kind of funny looking at the IMDb cast because the little profile pictures they have by various people, like it's very different how recent the pictures are. Like for example, you look at Steve McQueen, he looks like Steve McQueen in this movie, maybe a little bit older. Then you look at the Richard Attenborough, and it's him from Jurassic Park. So anyway, he played Hammond in Jurassic Park. For anyone who doesn't know who Richard Attenborough is. Um,
well, I will let you close that out or introduce
okay.
Starship. Well, I just go. I'm gonna go right here and fill out my water.
All right. Yeah. I think we could probably ramble on with more trivia about Great Escape if we wanted, and we can come back to it if we need to. But in the meantime, let's talk about Starship Troopers. This was a 1997 movie directed by Paul Verhoeven, who has quite a storied career because he has made movies that were like instant big huge hits and still considered classics today like RoboCop, and then also made movies like Showgirls, which is not necessarily considered to be as big a hit or enduring classics. He has made a lot of movies that have don't always impress people equally, But he directed Starship Troopers, and one of the things that I think is fascinating about it, and I'm not sure I can, off the top of my head, think of another example. He chose to adapt a Robert Heinlein novella. It was supposed to be like a for young ages novel at the time that it was written, but he decided to take it and literally satirize the actual source material. So instead of just saying this is a great book, let's just make a movie of this, it was more like this is a book that has uh, some really interesting things in it, but also some like politics that I really don't like. What if I actually just like make a movie that sort of makes fun of that, but do it in kind of the, you know, sloppy, funny, sexy way that Paul Verhoeven makes movies. Um, that I think to a large extent it may be that this movie has grown in its esteem over the years as more and more people sort of pick up on what he was trying to do in satirizing. Because a lot of people, even Roger Ebert, really didn't quite get that at the time. Um, and I remember seeing it while in college, and the prevailing opinion amongst a lot of my peers being, I mean, it was pretty awesome, but there were some weird parts that kind of made me feel a little bit weird about what was happening. And that is like just that sort of, that is the tiny glimpse of the satire just trying to penetrate the rest of what's going on in your, it's like maybe you're not supposed to feel great about what's happening. Maybe the fact that Neil Patrick Harris may as well be wearing an SS uniform at the end ought to be a clue that there's something going on here, among
Yeah,
other things.
it is funny because, like you said, it's when you know it's there, it's so obvious,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Yeah.
because it's so over the top, like to the point
Right.
of like the uniforms and just like
Mm-hmm.
just if you didn't get it yet.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the little news segments, which, I want to talk about those in a separate capacity too, but like a lot of those really drive it home. Like there's just no straight read for those things. Like they're like those things are not just like, oh, here's some expedition in an easy to digest way. It's really more like some of it's really in your face. Like the one that's talking about like they're starting to think that there might be a smart bug, and there's like this, you know, news talking heads arguing at each other, and you have the one woman who's just saying, "Look, we're just seeing them display advanced tactical behavior. It just there's no other explanation. There must be something we haven't seen." And then the other guy just going, "I find the idea of an intelligent bug offensive." And it's like, how are you supposed to not think that that's on
Satire.
purpose,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like that's not straight ahead. That's obvious. But we have Prince Justin in the chat who just says, "Would you like to know more?" And it's like, yes, that's another. Um, Actually, I want to come back to that just to finish summarizing it for anyone who doesn't know this movie. I mean, the basic plot is that we follow some young people as they join up in the military, just as this government where they live, the Earth Federation, goes to war with these alien uh, this alien race that's vaguely insect-like, that they call arachnids, which is another just like it's weird that they're bugs, but they call them arachnids, which is an actual like that's an Earth category, and they're not actually like that, and they're also not bugs, but I think that's some of that's on purpose because it's just kind of illustrating how like the words don't even really mean anything. But it's just this big war, but the movie in and of itself is primarily doing a very surface level war story, somewhat like some of those movies that we talked about, like the World War II movies, where like we see the characters have to make sacrifices and stuff like that, but on the surface level, it's still kind of like this is an important war that has to be fought, and it's hard, but we're doing it, and we're going to win because we're awesome. But if you're looking beneath the surface, and the movie works pretty hard in a few places to try to get you to do that, it becomes clear that this government, this Earth government, is pretty like totalitarian and fascist. Literally, in order to vote and be a full citizen with full rights, you have to have served in the military. And you also, for some people, decide to join the military, for example, so they can become a citizen, so that it's easier to get a license to have children or run for office. These are all things that you can only do if you have served in the military. And there's so there's some messed up stuff there. There's also hints in the movie that gosh, is it, so one of the big things that happens is that an asteroid is sent to crash into Earth, and it blows up Buenos Aires. And that's actually the home city for a lot of our characters, which we'll probably want to come back to in a moment anyway, because none of them look even remotely like they would have lived in Buenos Aires. Um, but a lot of people live in Buenos Aires. That's not necessarily, like there's no universal say, like, you can't have someone who looks like Casper Van Dien who lives in Buenos Aires, but also there's no one who looks like you might more expect to have lived in Buenos Aires.
Yes, and yeah, I think we should come back to that because it's hard to put like. Anyway, let's get back to that.
Mm. Yeah. But so that attack is what spurs everyone to say, now it's a war. Now we're going to go and wipe them out. The only good bug is a dead bug. I say kill them all. And then you have just a brief moment where there's like a news reporter saying, like, what do you say to the reports that they only attacked us because we invaded their protected territory? And it's like, I say kill them all. So the implication is that we invaded their territory, they defended themselves, so now we're going to eradicate their entire species. So, and it's actually a little bit interesting just to put into historical perspective that this movie came out in 1997, which was pre 9/11, which there's some interesting historical parallels to a little bit there. Just the idea of like 9/11, certainly a devastating attack, but did we react to it in the way that was kind of the most helpful? I don't know. That could be more debated.
I think it's been debated for
Yeah.
20 years
Yeah.
at this point.
But certainly, this movie, though, it has lots of these little glimmers that maybe, these young people are not, that are, joining the military, are kind of unquestioning tools of a fascist government that is waging a war of genocide that was possibly, provoked by their own side. But it's presented as kind of like, oh boy, we're gonna go get those bugs. We're gonna win it for mom and dad and apple pie, and all of that sort of thing. So it's an interesting mix in that regard. But coming back to the, do you want to know more? Like, one of the things that happens a lot in this movie, if you've never seen it, is that a lot of exposition is delivered through these sequences that predated and nonetheless were eerily accurate predictions of what online news is like. Because it would show just a tiny little snippet of some headline level story with like maybe 30 seconds of video, and then pop up with like a little menu where you can say like top news or global or whatever, and then it would have always at the bottom, like you're going to click it, would you like to know more? And it's kind of just amazing how accurate that kind of turned out to be.
Yes, that part rewatching it was like, wow,
Mm-hmm. Because like there were glimmers of the internet in 1997, right? Like there were chat rooms and stuff.
Yeah,
Hmm? But
clickbait and manufacturing headlines to generate clicks because that's where your revenue comes from. I mean,
mm-hmm.
this one isn't using it as a money making thing. It's more of the tool of the state reason.
Propaganda.
Propaganda, right, as opposed to financial. But the financial motives now have driven, that's what things are like. And so you're right, it's absolutely crazy that, because that wasn't a thing back then, you know.
Mm-hmm. Um, so I've talked a lot about Starship Troopers. And I could go on, but did you have anything you wanted to kind of bring up, or how did you feel rewatching it?
Um, I mean, I had that same reaction to, these, the way that it weaves the thread of the news stories. I had both the reactions that you've already talked about,
Hmm.
which is number one, it's like, this is obviously this is what makes it obvious that this movie is satire. Like it's giving you the key
Mm-hmm.
in these news stories, right? So that you can understand that the other parts are also satire.
Right.
Um, and I definitely felt that. Um, and then the other part is that, yeah, it was weirdly prescient, of, you know, premonition almost of like what cable news and news in general would end up looking like. So those were both really big takeaways for me this time. Um, I, you know, I mean, I like this movie. It's never like one of the ones that's on my list of like, hey, let's watch a movie. But I think it's because it is kind of more heavy-handed than, like, and that's why, like, I get why people had that reaction of like why they
Yeah.
didn't like it, because you really it's very effective in what it does, and it's not always the thing I want to spend 2 hours doing, right?
It's
Like,
it's more fun if you stay on the surface level.
right, yeah, because it's not like you're not watching a fun movie where these guys, like, yes, you are watching a movie where like they're cowboying up to go kill the
Mm-hmm.
bugs, but
Yeah.
like if that's what you want, like you can't get out of the other part of it, and the other part's important, but it like makes you feel weird in the scenes where you're supposed to be thrilled and excited, but like it's hard to like get behind the rah
Yeah.
rah because it's manufactured. It's like it's kind of a so you're in this weird like disoriented place while you're watching it, or at least me.
Yeah. No, I
Um,
agree. It's got a strange tone in that regard because it would be very easy, and a lot of people did watch it this way, to just surf that surface level action and just say yeah, and then when someone gets killed, you say oh no, and then when they win at the end, it's like yeah again. It's easy to watch it that way if you kind of just ignore some of all of those other little clues that that some of that's going on. Like I think one of the biggest like signifiers, really, honestly, is just the dissonance of tone between the soap opera stuff, between the different, like the love triangle between the characters, versus just the incredible bloody gore of those bug attacks and stuff like that, right? I mean, those are two things that you would not normally find in the same movie. Um, but yeah, but if you do sort of engage with that deeper stuff, it starts becoming kind of more like, oh, these guys are really not the good guys at all. This is an are we the baddies sort of situation. That's what this movie is, kind of. Um,
yeah, it's a complicated question, and that's you know, and I mean I think I shared with you. I mean it was a tweet from a
mm-hmm,
former military member who actually somebody asked him what the most realistic war movie was, and he without said Starship Troopers without a doubt. Now
mm-hmm,
he's kind of a personality in and of himself, like that's
mm-hmm.
part of why he's popular on Twitter. Like, but so I think he's kind of hat tipping all of these things. Is that like yeah, like this is very true. Like in order to get like a lot of the at least the time when he was in the military, like it was kind of hard to understand like were we really doing the right thing, not the right thing, but yet we had to go out and let's go do it. Like you have to be like that. It's almost like
Yeah.
it's and that's kind of what the movie's saying. I think
There's kind of this
yeah,
unspoken agreement that, like, okay, we all know that there's actually some messed up, complicated, nuanced questions underneath the surface. But if we're going to get through this thing, we need to stay up here. We need to just up here. You unpack that stuff with your therapist in 15 years. Right now, we're staying up here.
and I think that's one of the more complicated parts about this is that
Yeah.
when you look at our our sort of narrative characters,
Mm-hmm.
if they aren't buying into all of this, like they very likely could have been killed because like the decisions are made, like they're going to fight the bugs. And so if you're kind of constantly questioning, like,
Yeah.
are we doing the right thing or should we really be killing these
Well,
bugs? You can't go into the bug and be like, hey man, like I'm sorry that my country put me here, like, but can we just agree not to, you know, kill each other? Like that's not a choice at that point. Like they're
and
removed from
the
the
movie,
equation of choice. Yeah.
yeah, the movie makes that extra complicated for our specific characters that we're following, because it's made clear, first of all, that military service is voluntary, but it's also the only way that you get certain privileges and rights, like being able to vote, for example. But you could quit, like there's washout lane in the boot camp section, right? Like, and the implication is that he could just quit whenever he wants, like up through that point, probably not after boot camp is finished. But at least in this movie, as presented, it's extra complicated because, like, just as Rico is about to quit, that's when his hometown gets blown up, including his family. So, like, the implication, at least for him personally, is that if he hadn't joined up, he would have gotten blown up with his parents. Or, like, it's presented like his alternative, because his dad didn't want him to join up, is like, we'll send you on a vacation to Zagama Beach. And then later in the movie, we learn Zagama Beach also got blown up. So, so there is that extra little layer that, at least in the movie, the narrative is constructed to put Rico in this position where what other choice could there have ever been?
Yeah.
Yeah. Which I think is all part of the whole thing, right? And it goes in line with, like, there was kind of a rumor that has been partially debunked, partially substantiated, that the cast of this movie was literally cast on purpose to be pretty faces who aren't good actors. Um, Now, what Paul Verhoeven has said is that he admitted he cast pretty faces first. Like, that was his first priority, is that he
Because he was
wanted,
trying to
yeah,
have this raw thing. Yeah. And he
yeah,
wanted
well,
people to really get behind them because they're
specific,
attractive. Yeah.
yeah,
Gross.
specifically what he said is he wanted people who looked like they would have been in a Lenny Riefenstahl movie. Who, if people don't know that name, you should, because she is one of the world famous Nazi propagandists who used modern filmmaking techniques to make the Nazis look really good, during World War II. But so the idea of casting actors who might have been in one of those types of movies, or for that matter, if like Inglorious Bastards, right? Like the movie that they're showing at this showing, where the with the German soldier who is the hero sniper, right? Like the idea of the good-looking Aryan ideal who's going to be the person who they put on TV to show all of the teenagers at home that they should enlist and look cool, like Rico does, you know, that sort of thing. But yeah, so just like right from the beginning, this idea of deliberately saying these are all pretty faces, young people who are gonna be later asked to, like, I think it's amazing to have Michael Ironsides, this classic character actor who's just so tough, give all of these, his badass lines as the lieutenant. Come on, you apes, you want to live forever, and everyone fights, no one quits, all that badass stuff, right? But then later, to have Rico having received 3 battlefield promotions in the span of like 4 hours, all the way to becoming a lieutenant from what he was like a private or something. Like, he just keeps getting promoted because people keep getting killed ahead of him. And then all of a sudden he's in charge and he's saying all of this stuff to honor his lieutenant who meant so much to him. But it just, like, it does not sound the same coming from Casper Van Dien as it does coming from Michael Ironsides, and I think that's 100% deliberate. It's supposed
Yeah.
to feel like, oh, like, there's the surface level of like, oh yeah, he's honoring his lieutenant and he's following in his footsteps and all that, but then there's also the level of like, this is a kid who only knows what he's been told, and he is parroting the people who died before him because he doesn't know anything else. But anyway, I don't know. I enjoyed rewatching this movie, even though I have not rewatched it recently. But you're right at the same time that the more you engage with that satirical element, it's like the movie's kind of less fun on that level. But like at the same time, it's kind of incredible. I think how well the movie manages. Like if you think about it, the big victory at the end, like they lost half their fleet and hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and they've caught one brain bug that might help them do something. Yeah, we're gonna use that to figure out how to kill the bugs. Yeah, go team. And in the meantime, we're like, didn't we just watch like a dozen ships get blown up? Haven't we seen? Didn't they say that 100,000 soldiers dead in an hour during the first invasion of Clondethum? Like, are we actually winning this war? Doesn't seem like it. But you wouldn't know that from that final, newsreel, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah. Like, I mean, I think that's what I said. I really enjoyed it.
mm-hmm.
And I think you kind of wanted to talk about earlier, but just the choice to select that cast, led to you end up with people who aren't very representative of what people who would look
Yeah.
like in Buenos Aires, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Well, right, like they have, they all have, like Latin, Latino sounding last names, but don't they look extremely Caucasian?
yeah, and when I had always wondered, but there's no evidence of this in the movie, so I don't. And being how deliberate it is with everything else, if it was trying to make a point that by that time, like white people just sort of kept colonizing other places, like was that? But
I
it doesn't really seem to make that point, right?
Well, I hear what you're saying. I think it's kind of just a complex soup of stuff that doesn't necessarily like it's not all sharp and honed to make a specific point as much as all kind of just being tossed in there. One bit of context is that the characters in the source material, like a lot of these character names are drawn from the original source material, even though most of the plot is very different. Like I've actually read the book, and one of the things that's notable that's in the book as being actually pretty cool in terms of like when you're buying into the whole gung ho military aspect of it is that they have these suits of powered armor that they wear, and they're actually very cool. And a lot of the book actually talks about that, and then that's just nowhere to be found at all in the movie. Um, but well, I'm getting texts. But the characters in the book have these same character names, and they are from Buenos Aires. And so there's not like it's not said anywhere in the book. I don't think exactly what they look like. So it doesn't really say yes. Blonde-haired Carmen Ibanez from Buenos Aires. Um, like it doesn't say that exactly, but like so those names are taken from the source material, and then he also talks about casting people who would have been in a Lenny Riefenstahl film, so it seems like it might kind of blend those together. But then again, the idea that humanity in this story is very much invading the territory of other races and then annihilating them when they defend themselves, all of that does kind of fit into sort of the colonialist, imperialistic sort of, themes.
Yeah. No, I think that's probably a really good explanation for it.
Mm.
I agree.
But yeah, so that said, like we talked a lot about like thematic stuff, but one other thing that I wanted to get into though was I think part of what makes it work is that it's not just one note. Like one of the things that it also depicts in this futuristic society that's kind of, you know, a, a totalitarian regime, but it's also like totally gender equal, right? Like not merely do you have both men and women playing in the same like sports league, but also in the same infantry companies, and literally like just all showering together. I mean, there's a scene that is in this movie because Paul Verhoeven likes to show breasts on screen that's established in a lot of his movies. But I mean, but at the same time, it's a nude co-ed shower, scene where like as presented in the movie, this is totally normal for them.
Right.
And there's, women officers and pilots of the ships, and and it's that's treated as just totally equal, and there's no question about like should it be that way. It's just accepted as that's how it is. And why would it be any different? And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, I do think that that's, and is that part of the source material? I
I
don't.
don't think so. I don't recall. It's been a while. I read the book in college because I was curious about like the movie, and I had read some other Heinlein, and boy, like we could, there's lots of other podcasts that talk about classic science fiction, but Heinlein was a weirdo. He just like the whiplash you'll get from different books depending on what you read and when in his career, and trying to say what is it that he actually thinks about the world, because there's some where it seems like he's pretty sure about something, and then another book entirely will be feel something else entirely. But that's not really the point. The point was really just that I read the book in college and don't remember all the details. I suspect that that was not in the book. It might have been in there a little bit, but I think it was probably. This is another example of something that I could 100% believe without knowing for a fact, which is that Paul Verhoeven likes to put sexy people on screen in his movies, and he thought it would be cool to do a co-ed shower scene, and so that's why
That's why
that's
he
why it
started
happens.
making.
Yeah. um,
Well,
so,
doesn't have the female characters though exist in the.
I don't remember all of the details, like I said, so I'm not the authority on that. But some of like I mostly what like Johnny Rico is certainly, and Buenos Aires I remember as being in the original. But yeah, so in any case, I don't know how much of that comes. Some of that might have been in the original. Gender stuff was definitely also a thing with Heinlein. um, he was a complicated dude, Robert Heinlein. Anyway, I'm not prepared to really lecture on Robert Heinlein, but
I don't know anything about him, so
yeah,
you don't need to give me a
yeah. But
summary of what you may or may not know. Yeah.
well, one of the things that like to come back a little bit to one of the things that you mentioned, and I know it was just a tweet, so we might not have any more context, but it was a perfect illustration, I think, of like when that Navy SEAL says he thinks Starship Troopers is the most accurate war movie, like it immediately makes me want to say, okay, but what movie does he think Starship Troopers is? Right? Like, is because for all we know, like he's the one, he's riding the surface level like lots of people did, and he's just thinking it's kind of awesome, and he's thinking of like the enemy as these depersonalized monsters, and like I'm not saying that he is. I'm just saying that without context, it's hard to we don't
It
know.
is hard to know without context, and it's hard. And again, I don't know that he clarifies himself specifically in there, but he has authored a book. That's why I even know to like pay
Okay,
attention to him and stuff like that. He's kind of an odd personality that I don't want to get into too much of.
sure.
Like he has some strange political things, but it, I feel based on what I do read of him, and that's why I follow him on Twitter because he's interesting.
Hmm.
Um, is that like I think he definitely understands like the dissonance between the decision to go to war based on you know this is what we've decided we want to do,
Hmm.
and these guys aren't letting us do it, so we need to go and war them. and then the soldiers having to get caught up in like having to support that in order
Yeah.
to fulfill what they need to do. And
Yeah.
I think I feel like, just again, I don't know him and he doesn't specifically reference it, but in all of the context I have and the stuff that he's put out there, I feel like it's that dissonance between, like I said, the government part of it and the
Yeah.
soldier part of it. And the government is making soldiers do one thing, and the soldiers, in order to, they have to be rah rah badasses because that's how they get their job done. And oh, hey, they do actually kind of like, I think he does get the complexity to it.
Yeah.
I,
Okay.
I would venture to say that, without knowing him
Well,
specific.
that's good. um,
And it's why I found it interesting
yeah.
and why I sent it to you.
No, I thought that was interesting too, just because like I didn't know that when I picked it. Um, yeah. So in any case, I kind of picked it. If people re-listen to our last episode, I kind of picked it mostly because I kind of just felt like rewatching it. But
I think it was a
uh,
good choice. I
yeah.
think I feel like it fit in well with what we were
Hmm.
doing. So
Yeah. Um, but yeah, so I think uh, yeah, if if you don't have anything else specific to say about it, we could maybe go ahead and move on to the Hurt Locker.
yes, the Hurt Locker.
All right. Would you like to introduce the Hurt Locker?
Yep. So the Hurt Locker is a 2008. It's billed as a war thriller film. Um, what it follows is a explosive ordnance disposal unit. Basically, the guys in Iraq who hunt down the IEDs and dispose of them. Um, and it begins with the unit, and I think it's run by somebody else at that point, Guy Pearce.
Guy Pierce, yeah, is
Yeah, Guy Pearce,
yeah.
and it's done. And the reason I bring up just even the opening and the kind of the context of the movie is because it does set the stage for what the movie
Mm-hmm.
is about. So Guy Pearce is running this explosive ordnance disposal unit. He's very methodical, very careful, follows the rules,
Mm-hmm.
very just very cautious about everything.
Yeah,
But
still
then
kind of
ends up
joking around and got the bravado, but still following the protocols and stuff.
right. He follows the protocol. He's got a little bit of bravado. He's got good rapport with his teammates. They really like him. They respect him.
Mm-hmm.
And then it begins with an intense bomb disposal scene, which is a lot of the intensity parts of the thriller parts of the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately, he ends up getting killed, even though he followed all of the protocols.
Yeah.
And then the replacement that comes in, the character's name is William James. It's played by Jeremy Renner. Um,
Mm-hmm.
he is equally as skilled, if maybe not even more skilled, at bomb disposal, but he
Mm-hmm.
is much more on the bravado side, not as much of the build relationships with his teammates.
Yeah.
Um, Very much just kind of flies. He almost flies by the seat of his pants, but he's
Well,
because he has a confidence in his abilities
well,
that he's yeah,
yes and no. I mean, like I
and
think
he's
that
also willing to die,
well,
basically.
I
Yeah.
it I think it becomes relatively clear early on that although he is certainly determined to defuse these bombs, like he's not trying to get himself blown up, but it very much becomes clear early on he takes unnecessary risks because he likes it.
Yeah, he enjoys the thrill of maybe being able to die,
Yeah,
and
and
then the where the movie becomes interesting is the complexity of sort of analyzing why he's like that, why how he relates to his team, some other parts of humanity as he starts to as he befriends a local kid who he thinks gets killed later, and
mm-hmm.
his reaction and response to that, his reaction and response when his bravado actually does go wrong and ends up getting one of his team members shot, who
Mm-hmm.
blames him specifically for it happening, and the way that we see it, it's hard not to.
Yeah, I mean they said this seems like a really bad idea. There's other people whose job this is. Why are we doing this? And he says, "You're not allowed to say no to me, soldier."
Yeah.
You know.
And
Yeah.
so how so it takes that same thing, and it shows not only is it kind of exciting when it goes right, but it can go very wrong. And just sort of that whole relationship between how all those guys work together, how he deals it with himself,
Hmm.
how absolutely just terrifying like the Iraq War was, because you don't know who you don't know. It's not like Nazis in uniform like all these other movies we've been talking about. Like you're not really sure who's good and who's bad, and whether somebody is really just a merchant or a goat
Yeah.
herder, or actually is the guy who planted the bomb and is trying to get there, or lure you in to blow you up. And how that his personality almost works well in that situation, because it's
Hmm.
so not by protocol like everything else that they're involved in. And then yeah, like that undercurrent of him just being addicted to it, which is the final kind of closure to the movie, is that after he returns home, he's unable to find any joy in just being a regular member of society, to the point that he
Hmm.
re-enlists when he has a wife and a kid and a life, and he
Yeah.
can't be fulfilled anymore without that
Uh,
almost
th-
drug of
yeah.
war. Yeah.
There's this heartbreaking speech that he gives to his son. I think it's left a little bit like not confirmed, because he earlier he talks about like, are you married? He's like, well, I thought I was divorced, but she's still living in my house, so like
Yeah,
that.
it's an odd. The whole relationship is odd. It's
Yeah,
not clear.
they
Yeah,
don't
like
really
one
ever
thing.
like get too into it. But he's talking to this baby. He's acting like a dad, regardless of whether it's definitely his or not. Where that's left, not unconfirmed. But it's this heartbreaking speech because he is looking at this little kid and saying, "It seems like you love like everything in your world. You love your mom. I guess he does say you love your dad, implying that it's like him. But it's like you love your toys. But you're gonna find as you get older that a lot of these things that you love don't feel so special anymore. And then when you get to be my age, it might be that you really only love a couple of things, maybe just one thing." And just this implication that like diffusing bombs in that danger is like that's the only thing that he can feel things for anymore. Um, which is like heartbreaking because like I hope I'm not the only one who interprets that speech as like, oh no, this man is clinically depressed in a serious and self-destructive way. That's not how real life is supposed to be. Like, I
Yeah,
certainly
no,
don't feel like, oh, well, yes, as you get older, you just find that the things that you used to love don't give you pleasure anymore. Like, no, those are literally the symptoms of clinical depression, James. That's something you should
well,
talk to someone about. Not that's not your infant son.
no, I think that is meant to be the implication. I mean,
Yeah.
that's sort of the ride that we go on with him, is that you know we we start off seeing him, and it's like, oh, this guy's, oh, he's dangerous,
Mm-hmm.
he's the cowboy, and but man, he's really good at this, and he's got kind of a charisma about him.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of like him as our hero, but then he keeps doing things that are almost unnecessary and
Mm-hmm.
pissing off the other guys we like, which are his team members,
Yeah.
who are really liked the guy before, who had all the protocols and like kept them safe and like looked out for them, and this guy's just doing whatever the hell he wants.
Quick
And
tangent on that is that Sanborn, who is like, he has two other guys in his team, but Sanborn is the one who's kind of like most like in his face about like, you're doing stuff wrong. Like, it's my job to protect you, and you're doing stupid stuff that means I can't protect you. And if you get yourself blown up, I'm going to be the one who has to feel like I didn't get to do my job, but I only didn't get to do it because you're taking off your damn headphones in the middle of defusing a bomb. Like that sort of thing. But that character is played by Anthony Mackie, who Marvel Cinematic Universe fans will recognize as Sam Wilson, aka the Falcon, aka the new Captain America. So I didn't remember that it was him in this movie, but as soon as I saw him, I was like, "Oh, look, that's Sam Wilson. I like him." But I think he is definitely that
I believe
character. Hmm?
also Dr. Dre in the NWA movie.
Oh yeah, I that sounds right. I don't remember specifically, but I believe you.
I think he is. But anyway,
I like him. I like as an actor for
very
sure.
good. Yeah.
And in this movie, in a lot of ways, I think he is kind of the audience surrogate. Like, you know, we, as we watch James, we're kind of watching him through Sanborn's eyes in a lot of ways, I think. Um, because, we see, for example, you know, Sanborn with the old team leader, right? And then that specifically gives context to how he feels about the way William James does things. Jeremy Renner's character, right? And but I think you're right. I liked this movie more on this watching than I did before, and it wasn't that I ever disliked it. I always respected like the craft of it, but I think on first viewing I liked Jeremy Renner's character less. The parts where he's an asshole or dangerous or whatever were more powerful to me, and it made it so that it kind of outweighed the parts where, like, the way he's able to stay cool in a tense situation allows him to stabilize his teammates who are on the verge of panic, and the way he's able to support Sanborn when he's on the sniper rifle, and like the things that he actually does do really well that do seem like they are kind of all of a piece with just who this guy is, right? Like those things that are, like you are in this movie just constantly riding this seesaw of this guy is dangerous. He has no regard for himself or his fellow soldier. He's, reckless. He's going to get us all killed. We're going to kind of, sort of joke about killing him um, because he's going to get us killed if we don't. But then we don't do it because, of course, we wouldn't do it. But we sure did hold that detonator and think about how if we pushed that button, it would blow him up because he left his gloves down by the bomb and has to go get them, even though we're sitting here holding the button waiting to blow it up. Ugh. But yeah, okay, I forgot where I was getting going with that.
You were just talking about how you liked it more in this viewing because you started
Oh,
to get more
well,
into.
yeah, I was able to watch that sort of back and forth a little bit more.
Yeah, and this is and so this is probably the part where I wanted to bring a little bit of what we talked about with Black Hawk Down into this, and why I kind of particularly highlighted Eric Bana's character,
Mm-hmm.
as like the badass Delta Force guy, because in that movie he's untouchable because of how competent and skilled he is. Well, this movie is like, this is the guy who's equally competent and skilled, and there's a lot more complexity to it. Like, he's not just this badass warrior, like he's broken
Hmm.
because of a lot of these things.
Yeah.
And it makes it hit home and kind of takes a little bit of the, war is cool
Yeah.
part that
The
we were talking about earlier. War is thrilling.
right.
There are still thrilling parts in this movie, which is part of what I think. Like you said, there's a seesaw, and they
Mm-hmm.
hit these beats really well, because like the scene you talked about where he takes out his headphones, the earlier scenes, like we're getting this whole like, oh well, he just has a different style, but that's how he works. And then he does that, and you're like, no, no, you could have still had your style and done it, and not done that, and actually endangered everybody else,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, now that was too far, man. Like, and then there's a really cool like assault scene where they ultimately end up finding the dead boy who they
Mm-hmm.
thought was the DVD
Right.
seller.
I want to
But
come
that
back to that.
assault on that compound is very like, the Navy SEAL cool, like shoot, move, communicate, like let's take this down, kill all the baddies. But then the next time that they end up in a scene like that is the one where he just like randomly decides that's what they're going to do in the dark in the middle of the night, and it's
Yeah.
like, well, that's not as cool, and he ends up shooting his friend. Like, it's and so you're pacing these things and juxtaposing them on each other, in a weird way that kind of, I don't know, it really moved me in a way that was like, okay, yeah, the things that I find exciting about combat films, are in this,
Right.
but there's also, this, like, this is
the
kind of a shitty place to be, you
well,
know?
yeah, it kind of highlights that a lot of the traits that make someone excel in that kind of situation, like that situation, is so divorced from what we think of as a lot of the rest of human experience, that the traits that make you excel in that environment are often incompatible with the traits that allow you to excel in the rest of the human experience. Um, and we have in the chat, Alien Raygun points out that in the Hawkeye origin story, relevant because of course Jeremy Renner plays Hawkeye in the MCU. In the Hawkeye origin story, he learned to use a bow to be able to blow up bombs from a distance.
Look at
I
that connection.
I
Yeah.
did not know that. Interesting. um, but one of the things that I thought of when you were talking about the Eric Bana character is in this movie, Ray Fiennes' character, who is definitely presented also as kind of like that. He's presented as kind of being a little bit like um, Jeremy Renner's counterpart, in the sense of um, he's also the guy who feels very at home in this setting, very cool under pressure. He's doing his thing, he's good at his job, and all of that sort of thing. And he's presented as being this kind of like, you could imagine him being the hero of another movie, and in an almost hero worship sort of way. But then what happens to him? Well, like, they're in the middle of trying to deal with a sniper, and he stands up a little bit too much and he gets shot, and now he's dead.
Yeah.
And just this movie kind of being willing to sort of do that to the audience, to just kind of highlight what Eldridge, the other member of our little team here, was saying earlier, of like, Army says to be all you can be, but what if all I can be is a corpse on the side of the road? Like, people die in a split second and there's nothing you can do. Or is there? You feel like, well, what if I had just pulled the trigger at the right time? They would still be alive, you know? And then of course later, he encouraged this guy who's trying to give him counseling, this officer who's trying to counsel him, said, well, you have to see how it goes when we're out doing our thing. And the guy comes out to see for himself and gets himself blown up. Um, and so just all the more this highlight of like here's a whole actual person with their own thoughts and feelings and history and family. And one second they're there, and then the next second, nope, they're just dead now. And how hard that is to kind of reconcile.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful scene. I
Oh,
think
so I'm
there,
sorry. I
no, and
know.
there's a whole other layer to that scene, which is kind of odd in that I'm pretty sure they're intended to be mercenaries. Ray
Oh,
Fiennes'
yeah,
crew.
no, I contractors is what I think they say in the movie, but yeah.
Yeah, which was definitely a thing in the
Mm-hmm.
Iraq War,
Yeah,
and
like
sort of a controversial
Blackwater.
thing. And
Yeah.
yeah, and to the point where it's like it's almost showing like that's
Well, I mean, they're
almost
explicitly
like
bounty hunters, right? Like, he's
right,
talking about collecting bounties for these specific individuals, live or dead. Yeah.
right, and that's why they like it's a great positioning because, like you said, he's almost like Jeremy Renner's counterpart. It could be the hero, and it's like it's showing that Jeremy Renner is almost functioning like a mercenary, not because he's really only worried about what he wants to do. Like
Mm-hmm.
there isn't a ton of by the end of it, especially there isn't a ton of patriotism
Well,
left in him, and not
yeah.
it's not he's not anti-patriot. He's just agnostic of patriotism. He's just a
Yeah,
mercenary.
I think that that's a really solid point, because the truth is that there is almost zero presence of any higher up officers in this movie. Like, the only two examples of any officer that's above Jeremy Renner are Cambridge, the guy who's counseling Eldridge and gets blown up, and whom there's almost an relationship of peers um, with Jeremy Renner's character, even though we're talking about a colonel and a staff sergeant. Like, there's an actual very different rank there, um, but Jeremy Renner treats him like, oh, you want to come along? Sure, that sounds fun. Hop on in. I'll tell you not to fire outside the, don't fire through the windows of the Hummer. because like I'm going to just intuit that you don't know what you're doing out here, even though you're a much higher rank than me. But then the only other higher officer we ever see is David Morse's character, who is introduced being a sociopath by saying we're going to double tap this guy that we wounded because it's too much trouble to treat him, and then proceeds to fanboy Jeremy
Yes.
Renner's bomb defusing skills, and it's so obvious how little Jeremy Renner cares that this officer is praising him. Right? It's so clearly a I'm saying the right things because you're a superior officer and I don't want to get in trouble, but I'm not doing it for you, sir. Like he tries to demur and not give a number at first until the guy insists, and even then it really is like, yeah, okay, I mean, yeah, you think it's really cool, I mean, I kind of think it's cool too, but I don't think it's cool because you think it's cool. In fact, I
Yeah.
kind of wish you would stop talking to me about it because it kind of messes up what I've got going on.
Right. And that also serves another purpose of showing that he's not achievement like collecting.
Yeah.
He's
Well,
not doing this because of
he
the
does collect the
gamification
bomb
of like,
parts.
yeah,
He does collect the bomb parts.
he does, but he's not tallying it
Yeah.
for that. Like it's the experience of being
Yeah,
there and
no,
the
you're
and then
right because
yeah,
yeah, what he says about it is that it's so weird to hold a thing and know that like this could have killed me.
right,
And to sort of revisit the adrenaline with it as opposed to saying I'm awesome, I diffused it. It's more like I get to revisit that feeling that I had of like this could kill me, and I get to
right.
hold it in my hand.
Yeah, he's not thinking about it as I went, whatever, I can't remember the number, 187 or whatever, let's just
Mm.
say 100.
Well,
It's not like I went 187 and 0. He's
it's
not,
873,
or 870. Yeah, it's
which
like,
is a
he's not like,
crazy number.
yeah, he's not like, I'm 873 and 0. Like, he's not tallying it that way. Like, he is tallying it, but it's not like the
Right.
gamification achievement mindset.
Yeah.
It's the
Well,
experience of all 873 of those things that almost killed him that is
yeah.
more important to him.
Well, it's also subtle, but there's also some implication that it's not 873 and no. Like it might be 873 successful diffusings, but like there's the bit where he's fighting. They're all drunk after the sniper thing, and he's fighting with Anthony Mackie, and like says, "Okay, take off your shirt because he has to punch you in the stomach. I'm going to draw a circle." But like observes like got a lot of little tiny scars on here that look like shrapnel, and Jeremy Renner kind of quickly brushes him past that line of conversation. So just seems like
It's almost like he's not tallying the losses, right? Or
yeah.
not, yeah, he's not.
How many have you diffused? Might be like the number that he was successful, but doesn't mean that was every time. I mean, he's clearly got all his limbs, so like any of the failures were not, extreme. But oh, a couple things. One is that Alien Raygun in the chat clarifies that it wasn't the actual origin. He was making a joke about this movie being the origin story for the MCU Hawkeye,
Oh,
which I actually I do actually like that now that I realize it was my lack of knowledge about the actual Hawkeye's backstory that led me to suspect that was possibly true. So I didn't want to assume it was a joke and be wrong. But yeah, that's it is funny. Um, but
well,
the
my involvement with Marvel, so I
uh,
unfortunately I
well,
get the joke now, but I definitely didn't pick up on it because I don't.
yeah.
Yeah,
I've said so before. I think you would like the Marvel movies if you watched them, but that's the whole thing. Anyway,
it just
the
seems daunting at this point.
I
So
want to.
anyway,
I get that for sure. Although, like, slightly less daunting than that, I decided to watch through the Fast and Furious movies. I'm up through 6 now. Anyway, I wanted to go back to the opening sequence with Guy Pearce, because one of the things that really made an impression on me when I first watched this movie was how the bomb, when it goes off, like he gets to a point where he realizes um oh, that's what it is like he's in the process of starting to defuse it, but they realize that someone might be about to detonate it remotely, and so he starts to run away, right? but it goes off when he's still too close and he's killed. But one of the things that I think is really interesting is, although the explosion looks cool when it happens, compared to explosions that we're used to seeing in action movies, it looks like, well, he's in the big suit. He's outside of any kind of fireball. Like, it doesn't look that big. It knocks him over, but he's in the suit. Shouldn't he be fine? But he's not fine. It kills him. And it's just, it kind of highlights immediately, in a way that I think is subtle but effective, that explosions, it feels stupid to say, explosions are actually dangerous. Like this idea of, don't think that just because you're wearing this suit means that you're safe. Which is
Right.
very important, of course, because we need to understand that as he wears this suit around, because he wears it around almost like a security blanket rather than like for actual purposes. And because like there's the one time where it's starting to get in his way, and he realizes this bomb is big enough to kill me regardless, so I'm just going to take it off. Which again is kind of like you can understand the logic on one perspective, but I just, it really made an impression on me though in watching it the first time, of just like, that explosion didn't seem big enough by sort of Hollywood movie standards to kill him when he was wearing a special suit and that far away. But because this, technically is a Hollywood movie, but because it's trying to tell a story about more realistic aspects of bomb detonation, or at the very least, maybe that's not even the right way to put it. It's not about making it be more realistic. It's about making a movie where the bombs are presented as extremely dangerous, which is
Right.
its own sort of Hollywood depiction in just the other end of the spectrum, right?
Yeah, because that was something I was going to get to, and I'll just touch on it very
Oh yeah,
quickly.
go
Is
ahead.
that's one of the main criticisms I could find of this movie, is
Mm-hmm.
that it is actually the how these units run. Apparently this is not a very accurate portrayal about bombs and
Mm-hmm.
these units and stuff like that. But I I can get why, if you served in one of these units and this is what is being depicted, you would be frustrated. At the
Mm-hmm.
same time, I don't feel like it takes away from what I feel like is the main point of the movie. To what you're getting at here is that it's just trying to show bombs are real and dangerous, and there were a hell of a lot of them over there. you know?
Well, and I think one of the things about this movie that I think you could potentially criticize it for, potentially, I'll set that aside for a moment, is that, when we talk about the idea of, is a movie a pro-war movie or an anti-war movie, this movie honestly kind of sidesteps that conversation, right? It's not even really about the like war in general or the Iraq war in particular. It's more just about the idea of what combat does to a person and the effect on this particular character and this character study of this guy. And so a lot of the things that might not be 100% realistic in terms of the way that, actual bomb disposal teams work, those things are changed in order to highlight the character study that they're trying to tell in this movie,
Yep.
right? So it's not even really like, because I think if we wanted to analyze this movie from a pro-war or anti-war lens, I mean, it certainly shows lots of negative effects of war for sure. But at the same time, the movie does not really seem to ever question that the American military is in the right to be there in Iraq, right? It does raise the complication and the paranoia of this feeling like you would like to be able to be friends with the Iraqis who smile at you and wave and are nice, or the cute kid who sells bootleg DVDs. You would like to be able to be friendly with the people who are acting nice to you, but the problem is sometimes people use that as a cover to get close to you and then blow up your best friend. And so they live in this constant state of like, I am, well, it's just like when the colonel gets himself blown up, right? Like he's seeing these people who are kind of in a dangerous area, and he's trying to be like super nice, and he's trying to approach them and use what little of the language he knows, and kind of engage and not be this hostile force invading their territory. But he's finding that, like, but they're not listening to him. Despite him trying to be really nice and saying, oh, well, yeah, it is a nice day, but not very safe here today. You should probably move along. But they just don't. And more people keep coming out. And he keeps just sort of like trying to stay on that level and not getting mad until he finally gets to the point where he finally just raises his rifle again and just says, no, I need move. You need to move right now. And then they finally do, but of course they leave a bomb behind that he didn't realize was happening because he wasn't really paying attention, and it's kind of presented as he was insufficiently suspicious. And it's sort of like that's what happens if you try to be nice, right?
If you're not running on this constant paranoia, right?
Yeah. Well, but like the movie definitely depicts, like, from the soldier's eye view of this feeling of like, I would like to be able to think that there are lots of people here who are perfectly nice and not involved in the conflict, and they're maybe even happy that the U.S. is here, but I can't tell the difference by sight because some of the bad ones act like the good ones, from the soldier's perspective, right? And so depicting that paranoia, I think, is really effective in the movie. But the movie, that just the same, doesn't seem to ever question that the idea that there might be some of these people who don't want the U.S. to be there might be justified in feeling that way, right? Like the movie doesn't even really entertain that. It seems very like it could potentially be seen as war is bad, but this one's still necessary.
Yeah, I think I feel more on like where you talked about like it more just sidestepping it as opposed
Yeah,
to like
I agree. It mostly it tries to sidestep it. I was kind of just saying, like, if we forced it to choose. But I agree. Yeah, I think it. Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off there.
no. That's I was really I was going to say to
Yeah,
that. So,
yeah,
but just to kind of cap off like you're believing the constant state of paranoia. I mean that's sort of highlighted in the whatever I call it the Beckham scene.
mm-hmm,
Where the kid who goes by Beckham who when he discovers the boy who looks similar
mm-hmm,
stuff with dynamite, like it's a natural leap for him to make. Like we don't even question like that would be something that they would do.
yeah.
Like, because the kid was close to him. So why would they not pack him full of dynamite and then blow him up? Like
I
it,
Yeah. I mean,
and
I
then his
think
like total dissociation when he finds out that he's alive and it's like it doesn't even
yeah.
matter. Like he's not like happy that he's
Right.
alive. He's just like,
It.
well, I've moved on from that. You
Well,
know.
I felt like it was less about that and more about like it wasn't more like I've moved on. It's like
I don't mean
his.
like consciously like he said
Oh,
that. I think like he had just
well,
he made this disassociative leap
no,
that it didn't even like register. That's what I
he
was trying to say.
definitely
So,
disassociated, like, because what we would expect the more human reaction to be was like, oh my god, I'm so glad to see you. I thought you might be dead. I was worried. But I think what it is instead is that he knows that he went and he held the guy that the kid works for at gunpoint, forced him to drive off into the middle of a strange place in the middle of the night, where he invaded a stranger's home, like held this man and his wife at gunpoint, all to discover that, like, is this even that kid's house? Who even knows? They don't seem to know what I'm talking about. Am I right? Did I do, like, what am I even doing here? Like that whole sort of thing, and that obviously left him very shaken when it happened. And so now I think when he sees that the kid is alive, it's all the more that, like, all of that was pointless because it wasn't even the same kid. So, like, he harassed that DVD seller for nothing because it wasn't the same kid. And he did all of that other stuff. And so, like, he cannot allow himself to question his behavior in that way because then it all falls apart like a house of cards. And so I think it's less about like having moved on and more about like I can't let that in because this kid has now become a part of my past that I have to close the door on. And I can't look in there because I that's when I have a panic attack in the shower again.
Yep.
But I wanted to talk a little bit more about some of the interesting nuance associated with that because it's obviously a horrible scene when we find this kid who's a dead kid who's been wired up with a bomb inside him, and it's awful. And especially because we we are the way it's presented to us. We met this kid, and here's Jeremy Renner saying, "This is him. I know him. It is him." From a movie making standpoint, given that we kind of don't want to look too close, and the kid's kind of a little messed up anyway, like we don't know. All we know is that our protagonist character says it's him, so we think that it probably is, and so we're sad because we like this kid, and we're sad for Jeremy Renner because he liked that kid. But then as he's kind of coming out, there's a bit where Sanborn and Eldridge, the other two guys, where like Eldridge is saying like he seemed pretty sure it was him, but I don't I didn't know I wasn't sure, but he was pretty sure, and that's where like Sanborn says, well, I don't know, they look all the same, right? And it's just one of those things where it's like, except that we do later discover that it wasn't him, and so we were kind of fooled, just like Jeremy Renner fooled himself into thinking that it must be this kid, it must be the same kid. Now, it's obviously also awful that any kid would have that happen to him. But just this element of, like we were talking about, like not being able to tell the people who are genuinely friendly from the people who are only pretending to be friendly.
Yep.
And I don't know, I thought all of that was really interesting. And I think on first viewing, I was too in the moment with the like the just the events to really think of it on any kind of a thematic level. I think there's a lot of movies like that that reward second viewings because, like, one of the classic examples that I kind of come to when I think of this sort of point is The Big Lebowski, because I think The Big Lebowski is far superior on repeat viewings than in the first viewing, because in the
Yes.
first viewing, you're hung up on the mystery, right? You wonder, where is this girl? What happened to her? What's going on there? And it's only on repeat viewings that you realize none of that matters. None of that's what the movie's really about. Just don't worry about it. Just enjoy the ride. Enjoy the various antics that these characters are getting up to in the meantime. Don't worry about the mystery. But you don't know that when you watch it the first time. And so I think that there are a lot of movies that are kind of like that. And I think that might be part of also why I enjoyed this one a little bit more. Like the first viewing, again, I respected it as a film, but felt a little bit more like this Jeremy Renner character is kind of an asshole. I don't really like him. And it makes me feel weird. And then there's some bad stuff that happens. Then at the end, I'm like, okay, well, I mean, that was a movie, I guess. You know? But this time I kind of recognized the complexity a bit more of his character, of this idea of, and in particular, like how his fellow soldiers, like Sanborn, would feel about him in both directions. Like on the one hand, like this guy is so reckless and dangerous, I'm worried that he's going to get me killed if I don't do something about it. All the way to the other end of the spectrum of, I have to sit here for hours on a sniper rifle just to make absolutely sure that we got all of those guys there. And here he is handing me and holding a juice packet so that I can drink juice while I stay on the sniper rifle. And he is the one that's keeping me calm, and he keeps my buddy calm who's watching my back. And like that matters,
Well,
right?
and he actually helped is and it's kind of a weird scene too when he helps the other guy he helps coax him into killing the other combatant who's coming from behind,
Mm-hmm.
which was the guy's whole trauma with Guy Pearce, was that he
Right.
wasn't able to pull the trigger because
Mm-hmm.
he wasn't sure. He got him to do something that he ultimately never wanted to do. He never
Right.
wanted to shoot somebody, but it was the right thing to do. And so there's this whole other complexity of like he got me to do what I needed to save everybody, but then I also had to do something I didn't want to do, and like this, like
Yeah.
all those layers are just, yeah.
But
Um,
but having it just weave back and forth, because on the one hand, so like after that sniper scene, you're almost thinking, okay, well, like, maybe this guy is reckless, but at heart he's this good guy. But then there's the bit where like they're kind of drunkenly fighting, and then he starts like riding him on the ground, and he won't get off, and he won't stop, like, and that starts feeling like, wait, no, maybe this guy's really not a good guy. This guy is capable of complex behavior, which sometimes replicates good guy behavior,
right,
but he is a
because he ultimately
weirdo.
knew what they needed to do to get out of the situation. Maybe he
Yeah,
wasn't actually like, yeah.
yeah, yeah. But
But
I appreciated the nuance of that more in this viewing.
yeah, and I mean, I definitely enjoy. I liked the movie the first times I've seen it, and I really, really liked it on this rewatching to the point where I'm not going to go through the exercise of putting it on the list, but
Yeah.
I would probably put this on the list if I was making my own list of top 100 movies. I think this should go on there for this category because of the character study that is and the way that it taps into a number of genres that exist in war films to build this character study and make us realize this is a war film, but it's
Mm-hmm.
talking about all these other things. But the last thing I would say though is just to what you were talking about with like the casting of Starship Troopers. I think that maybe that's the it's not really an advantage, but to the advantage that I had going into this movie is that I really liked Jeremy Renner before I watched this movie, so I was like rooting for him, and like so my whole
So
first viewing was more of like, why is this character making me not like the guy that I like? And like I always almost
what
had like I didn't have as deep of a viewing as I have in sequences, but I was more towards giving him the benefit of the doubt the first time I watched it.
what do you think of as liking him from before this?
I really liked him. Honestly, it was silly. I really liked him in SWAT. As stupid of a movie as that is, but I
Okay.
was a big Colin Farrell fan for a while, and so I watched SWAT, and I was just blown away by like Jeremy Renner in that movie, and I was like, this is a guy that I think is really really good.
Okay. I mean, that's fair. I guess I only asked just because I feel like this was the first movie I was really aware of Jeremy Renner.
It, I mean, he like I said, it kind of. I mean,
It
I
was
only knew
certainly
him
his star-making
for
turn, right?
no, it
Yeah, yeah.
was to the point where it was like an uncomfortable Academy Award ceremony. And this is why I know that SWAT was the movie that did this because that was his biggest movie before that. And this was that weird Academy Award ceremony, if you remember, where they had the best actors and actresses like stand, and then they had like somebody who'd worked with them like talk about them.
Oh, yeah. I vaguely recall that.
Remember that where they were like under a spotlight and somebody would come and say like, "Here's why this person" or whatever. And Colin Farrell was the guy that they chose because he was the biggest star in the biggest
Mm-hmm.
movie that Jeremy Renner had done before that. And all he talked about was like how in SWAT they used to like run down to Mexico and like he implied like it sounded like he implied like do drugs and like get drunk and like that kind of stuff. He didn't really say that, but it was like super awkward.
Mm.
And Jeremy Renner standing there is like, and he was like, and now here you are. And I'm just like, yeah, here I am, man. Like, can I not have this? Like, why are you knocking me down a peg in a weird way?
I didn't
I just
realize
remember
this
that
was a roast.
exchange. It's so
Yeah,
bizarre. Yeah.
yeah. Um, yeah. So I think this movie has a lot to offer. Although, like as far as the list is concerned, here's just another fun question in the also rans category: this or Point Break for Catherine Bigelow, or something else.
Oh, I mean, I I've only just started to realize like how much of a Catherine Bigelow fan I was, which is kind of I mean maybe that's saying something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mean it to be that way, but
She's done a
as I
lot of great
continue
movies.
yeah, it's just like every time I come across a movie, it's like, oh yeah, that's a Catherine Bigelow movie. Oh yeah, that's yeah. I guess it really is mostly these three movies. Not to take away from her other stuff, but
Well,
it's
Strange Days is really good. I think that's kind of an
oh yeah,
overrated
Strange
classic.
Days. Yeah,
Yeah,
Point Break, Strange Days. I mean, K-19, The Widowmaker is interesting, but I don't think it's on this level.
yeah.
Um,
I
Hurt
don't think I ever
Locker
saw
Zero,
that one.
yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know the Point Break as much as I don't know that it belongs on the list. Maybe it does, just from cultural relevance,
Mm.
and sort of synergy of so many cool things coming together, like Catherine Bigelow's directing, sort of the post 80s, early 90s, like extreme sports thing, Keanu Reeves,
Well,
Patrick Swayze, like you just, yeah.
I have to say, having been going through the process of watching the Fast and Furious movies in order, and very much enjoying the process, I'm kind of all the more like, you can really connect the dots all the way to Point Break with that series, right? I mean,
Yep.
the first Fast and Furious movie is basically Point Break with cars. I mean, it's not even really very subtle about it.
No, it is literally that same movie. Yeah,
Yeah. But yeah, I guess that was part of why I just had Point Break on the mind.
yeah,
Just that
that
talking
is
about.
good.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think, which honestly, we should probably just speaking for, we should probably talk about the awards like we would in a top 100 movie.
Sure. Yeah.
Because this was, I think this, if I gotta go
Well, Hurt
find it.
Locker got a bunch of looks like won 6 Oscars, but I think it was nominated for some others. So won Best Picture that year, Best Director, Best Writing Original Screenplay, Best Editing, Sound Mixing, and Sound Editing. Thank God, by the way, I think we talked about this already, but thank God they finally just combined the two sound categories, because I know for the people who really care about the technical stuff, the difference matters. They do actually are different things, but nobody else can tell the difference, and it's just too complicated. So I'm glad that they combined them. But and then Jeremy Renner was nominated for Best Lead Actor, was nominated for Best Cinematography and Score, but didn't win those.
Yes. And so, I mean, notable about Catherine Bigelow, I think this is the first female director to win a Best Director.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I think it was only the second time a
Well, and
female was nominated.
and she was up against some heavy hitters too. So let's see. Where's the yeah? So
Avatar.
she was up against James Cameron, Jason Reitman, and Quentin Tarantino and Lee Daniels were the other 4 directors that year.
Yeah, it's not a courtesy win.
Yeah,
That's a
for
solid
sure.
win.
Yeah. And then to Jeremy Renner's credit, his competition that year for best lead actor included Jeff Bridges, Colin Firth, George Clooney, and Morgan Freeman. So that's definitely it's an honor just to be nominated sort of year.
Who ended up winning? You see?
Jeff Bridges for Crazy Heart, which I don't think I ever even saw.
Yeah.
But and the others too, honestly, like it was Colin Firth for A Single Man, George Clooney for Up in the Air, and then Morgan Freeman for Invictus. Like those are all great actors, but I don't really think of those movies in particular as among their best roles. Although, like I said, I didn't see Crazy Heart.
Yeah. Up in the Air was pretty good. Um,
I liked it. I guess I just it's
from
not.
a George Clooney performance
It's certainly
perspective.
not in my Clooney top 5.
Yeah. No, definitely true. Um, well,
Clooney
that's
top 5 has got to be what like for me, Out of Sight, Ocean's 11, uh, Oh Brother Where Art Thou. Go ahead and I don't know put Ocean's 13 on there. I could come up with some others, I'm sure. Oh, what was Michael Clayton? That one was really good.
yeah, it's very good. Michael Clayton, actually, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, oh, I'm just noticing one of the other Best Picture nominees that year was A Serious Man, which is a Coen Brothers movie that has really grown on me over the years. But in any case, that's really unrelated to what to the topic of this year. We didn't really talk about the awards for the other 2 movies. Should we do that? Probably
Uh,
Starship Troopers didn't win a ton. It wasn't sort of widely acclaimed at the time.
yeah, I mean, we can. I think I mostly wanted to point out because when we were talking about Catherine Bigelow, I think being the first female best director for this movie was and directing a war movie, which wouldn't be something that you would if you were putting odds on what the first best female director genre would be, this would not be what you would have chosen.
Hmm.
And so it's impressive.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, one of the things that is sort of notable about her is that as a female director, she does not make the sorts of movies that you might stereotypically associate with women directors. Okay? You know, she makes movies in genres that we might more normally expect to, you know, or associate with men directors. So,
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I'm glad you said it first. I didn't want to say it. I mean, she does make movies that are kind of like these male genre
yeah.
movies, but she makes them better.
Well, and like they're male protagonists and you know primarily male casts. You know, like it's not even women characters really in much of them.
Yeah, I don't even, yeah, I don't know if there is a female character in Hurt Locker. I guess the
Well, Evangeline Lilly plays you know his wife or not wife, but she's in like probably 45 seconds of the movie.
yeah, he has no screen time. Yeah, so
Yeah. Starship Troopers was nominated for one Oscar. Can you guess the category? It's the obvious one.
it's visual effects or something, right?
Naturally, yes. And it lost to Titanic.
Fair.
Yeah. Now that said, I think for 1997 it holds up really well actually. Just you know the number of these like you know the bugs themselves are obviously CGI, but given the number of them on screen and the combination, well, like they're largely CGI, but then there's also obviously a lot of like practical prosthetics done for when they you know stab into people and stuff like that, right? Um,
Yep.
so but all of that feels pretty seamless in a way that like a lot of movies of that era that use a lot of CGI didn't feel as solid. I think part of it may just be that the design of the aliens themselves is good. That like any slight uncanniness that might come from the CGI also just works to support that these feel like alien creatures.
Yeah, and I would say it's part of Paul Verhoeven's talents is to meld those two things in a way that is fantastical so that you accept sort of the unrealistic part
Yeah.
of it
Mm-hmm.
so that it is seamless, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yep. And then let's see, The Great Escape. I'll find the words for that. Take me a moment. But then the other thing we need to decide on is what we're doing for next time.
yes.
So The Great Escape the 1964 Academy Awards was nominated for Best Film Editing, didn't win, and that was it. Let's see, what were the best? We have all the actors up front on for that year. Let's see if I can find what Best Picture was that year. Best Picture was Tom Jones, which I have never seen.
Mm-hmm. I like
Well, okay.
Taylor.
Well,
I
so
haven't seen
How the West was one and Cleopatra were both that year. Wait, no, this is not the Cleopatra I'm thinking of. Oh no, it is. Yeah, it's Elizabeth
it.
Taylor. Yeah,
It is.
yeah. And How the West was one. And then there also America, America from Elia Kazan, which I also haven't seen, and Lilies of the Field, which I haven't seen. So can't really judge that one. You know, you get further back, I have not seen as many of the movies. um, but yeah, so I don't know. What do you have? Do you have thoughts about like I still have vacation brain, so I'm.
And I
It's
purposely abdicated because I chose this last one. So
that's fair. That's fair. So, well,
take a
let
pause, think about it, and
yeah. Well, so we can kind of come back, but another um, we could also just how about this? How about comedies? Do we want to just pick some comedies that we think are not represented, or I don't know. What do you think? Because on the I don't know.
can we
Never mind.
both
There's
can we agree to comedies but not decide on the spot?
okay. Yeah, we can. I mean, the only downside of not deciding on the spot is that listeners can't watch them along with us or whatever in the gap. But you know, that's fine. We'll figure it out. I'll announce on Twitter if anyone wants to know which movies we're going to watch when we figure it out, I'll post it on Twitter. So, but
Yeah, because I want to think about that.
yeah. All right, so we'll leave it there then for tonight. Thank you, everybody, for watching and or listening, especially those of you who joined us here in the Twitch chat. And we will be back soon for more movie talk. So in the meantime, watch good movies.
I might have to pick Big Lebowski. Oh, shit, I probably could have done that.
Big
Anyway,
Lebowski is pretty good. I wouldn't mind rewatching Big Lebowski.
yeah, but now we're out of it. I want to think about it. If
Well,
I,
I actually haven't stopped the stream yet. I said watch good movies. I was waiting for you to chime in on something. You want to say watch good movies and then I'll sign it off, or should we
uh,
go ahead and pick movies now that you've mentioned Big Lebowski?
there's so many good ones though. Um,
Well, we can stick with our original plan. We'll talk about it, but in the meantime, I'll actually sign off if I leave it open for
watch
you to
good
say
movies.
something. You say something. Watch good movies.
Good movies.